I love watching bad movies for fun, but sometimes they're so bad I can't help but wonder, how do these movies even get made in the first place? While it's a simple question I ask myself while doom scrolling Letterboxd, I've started getting more curious about the answer. On one side, you have big budget movies like Joker 2, which got poor reviews and lost nearly $150 million at the box office. On the other, you've got lower budget releases like the recent War of the Worlds, sitting at just 3% on Rotten Tomatoes weeks after release. Clearly, bad reviews and financial losses can happen to any movie. And because of this, I analyzed some popular bad movies to figure out why they fail in production, how even good movies can fail at the box office, and how it can impact everyone involved. The aftermath is what surprised me most, as it's easy to overlook how a bad movie can negatively affect the image of the people that brought it to life. But before we talk about the damage, we need to go back and see how problems in production can ruin a movie right from the start. Some of the common issues that contribute to a bad movie are creative disagreements, script rewrites and reshoots, rushed productions, and the hardest one to fix, just a bad idea. Let's take a look at a couple movies that face these problems to get a better idea of the impact. To start, there's the Fantastic Four. No, not that one. This one. Famously, this movie did not do well. While it wasn't a massive financial loss, poor reviews from both audiences and critics quickly tanked its box office performance. The main issue came down to creative disagreements between the director, the writers, and the studio. The director wanted a darker version of the film, but the studio felt differently. Ultimately, the studio had final say on the edit and recut the film, which is what changes the plot and the overall tone. And of course, we know the result of that. On a more extreme level, we saw the same type of conflict with Justice League. When Joss Whedon stepped in for Zack Snyder to oversee post-production, everything changed. The studio lacked trust in what Snyder had created so far, insisted on a shorter runtime, and Whedon ended up rewriting and reshooting about 3/4 of the movie, completely reshaping the vision. If that wasn't bad enough, there was no additional time given for production because the studio was set on meeting its original release date for financial goals. Yet sometimes, the cause of a bad movie doesn't need to be as complex as that. It could be as simple as just being a bad idea. The recent War of the Worlds is a perfect example, mixing an end-of-the-world story with the screen-life format, poorly timed humor, and awkward Amazon Prime product placements. In a recent interview, even the producer admitted that these choices missed the mark and overshadowed what they thought was an innovative idea. But it wasn't. The idea stemmed from how we communicated during the pandemic, but the movie took nearly 5 years to develop due to delays and production issues. By the time it was finished, they had missed the narrow window where that concept could have worked. Joker 2 is another great example. It had the potential to be really good, but instead of continuing the story audiences wanted, it became more about bringing the director's artistic vision to life. And he wasn't interested in making the movie that everyone else would want to see. It's respectable for him to be creative and do something different from a typical sequel. It's just hard to shift audience expectations when you're changing the direction of the story through a new genre. Regardless of how we feel about either film, it's clear that being disconnected from what the audience actually wants to watch can be a huge issue. And while there are plenty of bad movies we could analyze, these examples show a clear pattern. Production conflicts, rushed timelines, and competing creative visions can easily change a film's direction, usually not for the better. But there's much more to consider than just bad movies. What about the good ones that flop? How does that even happen? Well, the job doesn't end after completing a good movie. For a film to succeed, there are more hurdles leading up to release, such as marketing, timing, competitors, and reviews. It may sound hard to screw up marketing, but if it's not handled right, it's one of the easiest ways to miss the right audience or completely mislead them on what the movie is about. For example, let's look at The Fall Guy. Everything about this movie looked perfect. It had a strong cast, great early reviews, huge marketing campaigns, and even marketing stunts at its own premiere. Yet despite all of this, the movie lost $50 million at the box office. But why? Analysts believe the marketing leaned too heavily on the stars rather than the story itself. And since the original franchise wasn't that popular, it didn't hold enough weight on its own for potential viewers to latch onto. Although the movie initially had positive reviews at the premiere, there was too much time in between then and the official release for them to use it to hype up the marketing. Timing a release can be a huge issue for films as well, and was seen with West Side Story in 2021. Upon release, it had great reviews and even great marketing, yet it still massively underperformed at the box office, losing the studio millions. A big part of the issue was audience fatigue, as previous musical adaptations had struggled at the box office and weren't super appealing. On top of that, releasing during pandemic recovery wasn't helpful as families weren't in a rush to return to the theaters. There was some hope for traction later in the release window, however, Spider-Man No Way Home releasing shortly after took those chances away. All of this shows that the wrong marketing strategy, poor release timing, or incorrectly navigating competitors can turn movies with the highest potential into a flop. Initial reviews from the press and critics can have quite an impact as well, because the reviews may sway potential viewers on whether to see the movie in theaters, wait for it to hit streaming, or even bother watching it at all. And if you ask the CEO of Sony, that kind of influence completely tanked Madam Web and Kraven the Hunter because in their eyes, they were great movies that were treated unfairly by the press. Sure. So now we understand how bad movies get made and how even good ones can flop at the box office. But what happens after is where things really start to get interesting. For studios, the biggest impact of a flop is their money being lost. Sometimes that investment is just written off and they move on. Other times, it's made up down the road with future releases and streaming deals. At the end of the day, it's a financial game. That's also why we see major studios creating sequels, spin-offs, and reboots from successful franchises because audience familiarity means there's less risk financially. One loss here and there won't hurt a studio, but consistent underperformance will lead to delays to future projects, shifts in leadership, or full cancellations if not deemed financially viable. Of course, while everything revolves around the money, reputation is just as important. Poorly received films can damage trust in directors, actors, or even franchises as a whole. Remember earlier when we discussed Justice League? While that film was still in production, Zack Snyder's Batman vs. Superman hit the theaters. Even though it was actually making money, poor reception instantly put fear into the studio executives. This caused them to lose trust in Snyder's vision and use their control to push Justice League into a lighter, more humorous tone similar to the Avengers. Another great example is Sony. After their back-to-back failures with Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven the Hunter, they announced they would be stepping back from their remaining Spider-Man villain films because of their poor performance. Ultimately, it comes back to the people writing the checks as they want to protect their investment regardless of what stage of production the film is in. That's why independent studios like A24 are a breath of fresh air, as they operate on lower budgets, which gives filmmakers more creative freedom and less pressure. Everything Everywhere All at Once proved the success of this, as they were sure to point out they made the entire film on Marvel's catering and craft services budget. So what does all of this mean to us as the audience? A flop isn't just about the studios losing money and bad reviews. It can completely change the careers and legacy of those involved, negatively impact future projects, and shape what kinds of movies we actually see in the future, often reminding us that creativity can be overshadowed by financial decisions. For us, what matters most is the film itself. The financials and the reviews don't always reflect the quality of the movie. There's always a bigger production story to why things turned out the way they did. And that's what makes bad movies and flops so fascinating. Once you dig into the bigger story behind them, you may never look at them the same way again. There's a lot more that could be explored in what we covered today, but if you want to learn more about what was discussed, check out the links in the description for more information. And if you liked the video, feel free to subscribe or check out another one. Peace.